this is a book about reimagining power. And I really think that this is the central challenge for cities in Britain. This book basically says that cities are also the vanguard of problem solving in the world. I think we're moving from a 20th century style of problem solving and nation building and economy shaping and talent preparing and placemaking, where it was top down, government led, and very compartmentalized, very specialized. The 21st century is bottom up, it's led by cities. It's really designed and delivered by networks. These cities are not governments. They are not governments, they are networks of institutions and leaders from multiple sectors: public, private, civic, university, labor, environmental, the list goes on and on. And it is interdisciplinary at the core. If we are in a different world of problem solving, and if power belongs to the problem solvers, true power, the power to get stuff done, and if problem solvers increasingly concentrate in cities and conurbations, what are the norms and models that are emerging around the room, around the world, that we could capture and codify and then adapt and adopt? In a world where cities have market power and civic power, in addition to governmental power, suddenly there's a whole bunch of other opportunities that open up. A lot of what we were thinking about as we wrote this book is that we're at the tail end of a post-World War II cycle where we built a whole bunch of institutions, either in the image of the national government, or we built public authorities, that usually were given the remit to deliver state resources, right? So what if we took the next 3 or 5 years? And this is not a thought experiment, this is actually what we want to do. And we build instruments, intermediaries, institutions in our image. Not in the image of the national government, in the image of cities, for cities, by cities. So cities need more power. They need more power because your cities are part of a global network of cities. Particularly your core cities, right, have enormous assets and advantages that were built up over centuries, right? And they really fit within a milieu of global trade and investment and global connections. The bit of power that you've been thinking about, which absolutely needs to continue, is to devolve power down from this higher level of government. You've got to match devolution with evolution, right? And the evolution that you want to talk about is how to evolve a way of operating across public, private, civic sectors. Your leaders need to exercise soft power. Soft power is just the power to convene, the power to pull together folks from different sectors, the power to cajole, the power to shame. It's not just hard power. I'm in charge of this government agency, I'm in charge of this corporation. It's soft power. It's the ability to really enable collaboration. It's how do you take your public assets, particularly when you build infrastructure, right, which you do a lot of, and how do you ensure that that infrastructure and the wealth that it creates stays within the public realm through these smart institutions and smart mechanisms, and then gets reinvested for the public good. And then the last piece I would just say, how do we begin to think of cities as a collective? We've got to get to a point, and the Swedes and the Danes do this to some extent, where cities come together and they work with global financial institutions, and they work with global technology companies, and they begin to aggregate their market power. And they basically begin to work with these institutions to design and deploy instruments that work for cities. For the next 3 or 5 years, I would say the challenge for British cities is devolution plus these elements of evolution. What we've got to get about doing is really the kind of invention, innovation, both individual cities and collections of cities, both within Britain, within Europe, and across the world. We have to use this period to basically set up an architecture, just like the post-war period was used to set up a 20th century architecture in the United States, in Britain, and elsewhere. This is an urban architecture. It's a city-state architecture. And I think if we do our job right, what we'll end up with in the 21st century is two parallel and interrelated systems. One will be the system of nation states, and one will be the system of city states. It feels like we've come to a point in the evolution of the world, urban age, metropolitan century, whatever we want to call it, where we really need to recognize and assert these different kinds of power. Right? That's our proposition.